Memoirs of Aunt Martha. My daughter-in-law cracked up when I walked into the wedding alone, but a stranger walked in. They froze. I am Martha Holloway. It's been a long time since that name meant anything. Just a fading headline in some old business rag. Nowadays, I live quietly on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina, surrounded by hydrangeas and sunlit mornings. My son Ethan is gentle, so gentle it often feels like weakness. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, is sharp, ambitious, and firmly believes the past belongs behind us. Only Skylar, my granddaughter, is the one light still tethering me to this world. I chose silence for years until the day I received Skylar's wedding invitation. A small card, but enough to remind me. Some things, no matter how far back they go, don't stay buried forever. If you've ever suffered in silence, if you've ever given everything to someone only to be quietly forgotten, then maybe, just maybe, you'll understand me. Stay with me. Listen to this story, and perhaps in my quiet voice, you'll hear echoes of your own. Some invitations aren't written in ink. They're written in memory. And when Skylar sent me that wedding card, I knew I had to go quietly, just like the way I had lived and the way I had been quietly forgotten all my life. I sat in my little kitchen, the card resting on a wooden table worn smooth by time. Morning sunlight filtered through the window, falling gently on Skylar's delicate handwriting. She still wrote carefully, just like I taught her when she was a little girl. Outside, the hydrangea garden was in full bloom. I brewed myself a pot of Earl Grey tea the same way I've done for decades. The white porcelain teapot had a fine crack near the spout, but I couldn't bear to throw it away. It's one of the few things left from the days when this house still echoed with laughter. I picked up the Wall Street Journal. My eyes skimmed over market updates and rising companies. Summit Ascent Holdings. That name no longer made headlines like it once did. I folded the paper and set it aside. The glory days, now just a quiet ember. I once led Summit Ascent Holdings. Back then, people in Manhattan spoke the name with discreet respect. I built it from the ground up, brick by brick. But when Ethan grew older, when I saw the cracks forming in our family, I stepped away. Not because I failed, but because I understood sometimes a mother has to choose between an empire and the children she once cradled in her arms. The phone rang. His tone was plain familiar. I answered, "Hey, Mom." From Ethan's voice, always a little too soft, as if he were afraid of taking up space, even in his own home. "Just wanted to remind you about Skylar's wedding. Everything's almost ready." I let him speak while my eyes wandered to the garden. The hydrangeas were blooming boldly, their scent, sweet and steady in the light. Tiny flowers blooming in clusters, patient the way I've always been. "And please don't dress up too much," Ethan finished awkwardly. Then another voice chimed in, clearer, colder. "Just wear something simple, Mother Holloway," said Tiffany. She always spoke properly, even when being cruel. "It's Skylar's day. We don't want anyone drawing attention away from her." I paused before replying, my voice calm. "Of course I remember." I knew exactly what she meant. Tiffany, with her designer suits, her board meetings, her new Cadillac, and cocktail parties I was never invited to. She saw me as a shadow trailing behind her perfect family, a relic better left unspoken. The call ended without a goodbye. I set the phone down and took a deep breath. The scent of tea mingled with hydrangea drifting in from the porch.
Moments latte, a soft vibration.
A message from Tiffany. "Please remember this is Skylar's day. Don't draw attention to yourself." No exclamation mark.
No worms.
Just an order, cold and clinical. I didn't respond. I stared at the glowing screen for a long while, then let it fade. I poured more tea, my fingers tracing the cracked rim of the old pot. Outside, the sun had climbed higher. Its golden light spilled across the weathered white porch like warm honey. I slid open the glass door and stepped outside. The porch creaked beneath my feet. I sat down on the faded wooden Adirondack chair and looked out at my little garden. The hydrangeas swayed gently in the breeze. In the corner sat a small wrought iron tea table. On it a worn leather-bound book and a glass of iced sweet tea, still cool to the touch. Once I stood on grand stages, accepting prestigious awards under bright lights. I dined with powerful people, shook hands with men who never believed a woman like me belonged anywhere but in the background. But no one ever knew it was mornings like this I longed for the most. Quiet. A warm cup of tea, soft sunlight, and the scent of hydrangea in the air. I closed my eyes and let the sun brush across my face. The wrinkles by my eyes weren't just from age. They were scars etched by time, one silent cut at a time. There was a time I thought I could hold a family together with the same hands that built an empire. But Ethan grew up pulled away, thinking it was best. Then came Tiffany, confident, beautiful, ambitious, and distant from the very beginning. I was never invited for Thanksgiving at their home. Never asked about anything that mattered in Ethan's life. The gifts I sent Skylar were always met with awkward glances and Tiffany's quiet reminders. Thanks. But Skylar prefers more modern things now. But Skylar was different. Every now and then she would sneak handwritten notes to me. Ask for help picking a dress. Ask about my peach cobbler recipe from Christmases long gone. Little things, but enough to make me feel I hadn't vanished completely. I turned the wedding card over, read her words again so carefully written. I hope you'll be there. I want you to see me walk into this new chapter. I smiled softly, a smile no one would see. Some presences don't need announcements. I knew I would go to be remembered in my own way. And finally the day arrived. I stood before the mirror, adjusted the brim of my hat, and whispered to myself quietly as always. Some wounds don't bleed. They stay silent, so deep even a passing glance can make them ache all over again. I stepped into the coastal vineyard where the wedding reception was already set. No one turned. No one greeted me. Under Napa Valley's soft evening sun, the old redwood trees cast gentle shadows over long tables draped in crisp white linen. Pastel cocktail dresses shimmered in the light. Linen suits drifted past like part of the ocean breeze. I wore a long dusty rose dress, simple, modest. A wide-brimmed hat shaded half my face. An old brown clutch tucked under my arm. No jewelry, no perfume, just a quiet figure among the polished noise. The buffet stretched long with California classics, tuna tartare, farmer's market salad, and a tiered wedding cake covered in vanilla buttercream adorned with tiny sprigs of lavender. The air was thick with the scent of fine wine and fresh baked sweetness. Glasses clinked, laughter rang out, and somewhere in between the sharp clang of ambition masked as politeness. I walked slowly down the petal-strewn path, eyes scanning the crowd. Some glances flicked toward me, brief and indifferent. No one spoke. Tiffany stood out, of course, a deep emerald gown hugging her frame, jewelry sparkling in the sun. She stood in the center of a group, smiling just enough to seem gracious, but never losing that poised control. Ethan was beside her, stiff in his tailored suit, like an accessory she brought along. I caught part of Tiffany's voice, crisp and practiced. My husband and I are both legal directors at Summit Ascent Holdings. It's a family company, you know. We're proud to continue its tradition and long-term growth. Polite nods, a few murmurs of praise. No one asked more. No one mentioned the one who built it. I stopped near the edge of the vineyard, choosing a seat half hidden behind a cluster of wine barrels. From there, I could see the small stage beneath a broad tree, rows of chairs lined up neatly for the ceremony. No one approached me. No one offered a seat. That old hollow feeling settled into my chest again. Familiar, worn smooth like the table in my kitchen. I sat still, one hand resting gently on my clutch, afraid even a small movement might make me feel more out of place in all this polished splendor. Then a hand touched my shoulder softly. Martha. The voice was gentle, tinged with surprise. I turned. Eleanor Davis. After all these years, her silver hair pinned back neatly, wearing a cream linen dress. She had always been that way, simple, kind, perceptive. Oh my, it really is you. Eleanor smiled, leaning in. I didn't recognize you at first. You haven't changed, Martha. I returned a faint smile. Still the same, just quieter now. We shook hands lightly. Eleanor sat beside me, her eyes scanning the scene before us, then pausing on Tiffany. She's beautiful, Eleanor said, her tone sharp despite the words. But I don't think I care much for this atmosphere. I said nothing. Across the lawn, Tiffany's voice carried on, even and proud. And even with a volatile market, we've preserved the values our family instilled from the very beginning. I sipped my Earl Grey, letting the warm bitterness bloom on my tongue. No one asked about Martha Holloway. No one remembered the woman who once stood at the head of the boardroom commanding silence from silver-haired men. Skylar passed by holding a bouquet of peonies for the photos. She glanced at me just a flicker, and then unable to help herself reached out and squeezed my hand. Quick, quiet, unseen. I squeezed back. Just as quick, just as quiet. No one noticed, but I knew. The party went on. Stories of markets and mergers, of curated lives and polished success layered on every white-covered table. I listened, but I didn't speak. My silence wrapped around me like a shawl, part shield, part exile. Eleanor leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "They've forgotten you, haven't they?" she asked softly. I only shrugged. Some questions don't need answers. On the stage, the MC took the mic and began introducing the speakers. Tiffany stepped up, her deep emerald dress, ablaze among the pastel hues, microphone in hand like a scepter. "Thank you all for joining us," she began, her voice smooth, rehearsed. "Our family has faced many challenges, and thanks to the younger generation, Summit Ascent Holdings continues to thrive." Polite applause. I sat motionless, sipping the last of my tea, eyes drifting to the sky behind the old redwood trees. A bitter taste lingered not just on my tongue, but somewhere deeper. They may have erased me from their story, but history hasn't. And through the shimmer and show, a familiar silhouette appeared at the gate. Sometimes the past doesn't return with noise. It only needs a familiar silhouette. And suddenly the world forgets how to breathe. No one spoke. Conversations dropped mid-sentence like someone had turned down the volume. The acoustic guitarist in the corner kept playing, but their notes now sounded distant, misplaced. Mr. Harrison Sterling. I recognized him instantly, though it had been years. Snow-white hair, a perfectly tailored navy suit, that old ebony cane tapping steadily against the stone walkway. He walked slowly, unhurried, like the world moved only when he allowed it to. I wasn't surprised. I had been waiting for him. Near the stage, Tiffany's fingers tightened around her wine glass. She turned to Ethan, whispering something sharp and fast. Ethan only nodded, eyes fixed on the man who had just arrived. Harrison didn't pause to greet anyone. No handshakes, no pleasantries. He walked straight toward me. Eyes followed him, curious, confused, unsettled. They didn't know who he was, but they knew this wasn't part of the afternoon script. He stopped at my table and gave a slight bow. "Madam Holloway," he said, his voice low, warm, and clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "It's good to see you again." It was just a greeting, but it echoed like a declaration. I gave a slight nod. "And you as well, Mr. Sterling." We didn't need more. We had once shared far more important moments. Private meetings, late-night dinners where companies were bought and sold. Days when a nod from the two of us could shift the lives of hundreds. Harrison reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out an ivory envelope sealed with red wax. He placed it before me. His cane tapped once gently against the leg of my chair. "What belongs to you," he said softly, "has always belonged to you." I reached for it, feeling the coarse texture of the envelope beneath my fingertips. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Some things don't need to be read to be understood. Tiffany hadn't moved, but her expression had. The chill in her eyes cracked into something less certain. Her grip on the wine glass faltered. She glanced at Ethan, then at Harrison, trying to read him. Skylar stood near the stage holding her peony bouquet. She caught my eye, and for a moment her lips curved into the faintest smile. She understood without needing a word. Harrison turned to face the crowd, leaning gently on his cane, his voice calm and measured. "If I may," he said, "I'd like to honor an old promise." No one dared interrupt, but tension rippled like a taut string. Murmurs rose, sideways glances, raised brows. The atmosphere held its breath. Beside me, Eleanor gripped the handle of her soft leather bag. She leaned in. "Martha, what's going on?" I didn't answer. I simply sat still, hands in my lap, the envelope resting quietly between us like a relic at an altar I was never meant to have a seat at. Tiffany blinked rapidly, then marched toward Ethan, hissing under her breath. He looked weary, torn. That same look I'd seen 100 times, stuck between two women he never truly understood. Harrison looked at her. No smirk, no scorn, just a long direct gaze that saw more than it said. The acoustic guitarist shifted into a slow ballad. A lone cello cried somewhere in the distance. The wind off the Pacific stirred the white drapes tied to the wedding arch, making them flutter like fragile wings. I traced the envelope with my fingers. I already knew what was inside. Old promises, forgotten commitments, now returned whole. Harrison Sterling was not a man who broke his word. They may have erased me from their version of the story, but history hadn't. Sometimes the past doesn't come demanding justice. It simply returns to reclaim dignity. Truth doesn't need a spotlight. It waits quietly until the moment it can speak for itself. Harrison Sterling stood at the front of the vineyard, his eyes sweeping across the silent crowd. A breeze from the ocean stirred the salty air, bringing with it the murmur of distant waves. The acoustic band quietly disappeared backstage, their final notes fading into the tension that now gripped the gathering. I remained seated. The envelope Harrison had given me still rested in my hand. The red wax seal emblazoned with the old Summit Ascent logo seemed to warm beneath my fingers. Beside me, Eleanor sat stiffly, clutching the handle of her handbag, her eyes locked on Harrison with a look that held both dread and hope. He raised the microphone to his lips. His voice came steady, low, and clear. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to speak for a moment about history. The history of Summit Ascent Holdings, the place where we now stand." A pause. You could feel the stillness deepen. Even the clinking of glasses from a far corner sounded out of place now. String lights overhead cast a soft glow through the branches, bathing the lawn in something almost dreamlike. "More than 40 years ago," Harrison said, "before the market even noticed us, before Summit Ascent had a name, there was one person who laid the very first brick." He let the silence stretch. "It wasn't me," he continued. "It wasn't any of the powerful gentlemen here today. It was a woman. A woman many of us have forgotten, or worse, never truly knew." A stir rippled through the crowd. Glances exchanged. Awkward smiles. Tense posture. Tiffany stood beside Ethan, her face pale, her champagne glass tilted slightly on the verge of spilling. Harrison took a breath and spoke the truth aloud. "Martha Holloway, founder of Summit Ascent Holdings, the woman who built its foundation, who shaped it, who steered it through the most uncertain years with quiet resilience." No applause, no reaction, only silence. Heavy, undeniable silence. I didn't move, but the weight of their eyes began to shift toward me. At first curiosity, then surprise, and finally something like respect. Hesitant but real. Harrison went on. His tone was calm but resolute. "She never asked for recognition, never demanded a title, even when people assumed she had stepped away. She remained watching, guiding, keeping us on course." Beside me, Eleanor exhaled as if she had finally let go of something she'd carried for too long. She turned, gave me a small smile, quiet, complete. Harrison looked out across the vineyard once more, eyes touching each face. His voice lowered, but it carried deeper. "Today, I believe it's time those unseen efforts are finally named. It's time history gave her what it should have long ago." He lowered the mic, then slowly extended his hand toward me, palm open, steady, solemn. "Madam Holloway, if you would." I didn't rise immediately. I let his words settle into the space around me. Let them breathe. From the far side of the lawn, the MC stepped forward, voice warm and respectful. "At the request of the bride, Schuyler, we would now like to invite Mrs. Martha Holloway, the woman Schuyler calls her greatest inspiration, to share a few words with the couple." No clapping, no shifting in seats, just stunned silence, not from disinterest, but from the quiet shame of suddenly realizing what had been overlooked. I stood, my dusty rose dress swayed with the motion, the brown leather clutch still in hand. I walked toward the stage, one step at a time. Tiffany froze. Her champagne trembled, the liquid inside, catching the light with every tremor of her hand. Ethan stared blank-eyed. Schuyler whispered something to the person beside her, but I didn't catch it. I reached Harrison. He gave me a second respectful bow, then stepped back, giving me the space. I didn't touch the microphone right away. I stood in silence, letting the weight of their gaze settle. No smile, no nod, just me, still steady and true. Then I raised the microphone and spoke softly but clearly. They thought I stepped back because I failed. But the truth is I never left. And I stepped onto the stage, bringing with me the silence of all the years they forgot I was still there. Some victories need no fireworks. Silence can be the highest form of glory. I stood still beneath the soft stage lights without even lifting the microphone. The silence wrapped around us like a velvet curtain, sinking deep into every breath. Only the distant sound of the ocean remained, its eternal rhythm, playing quietly behind what I was about to say. I thought back to the day I received Schuyler's wedding invitation. A fragile card, heavy with unspoken weight. That day I made a promise to myself. I would go to be remembered in my own way. And now this was that moment. I let my voice rise, warm and steady, not loud, just enough for every ear to catch it. Happiness isn't something we're given. It's something we build with days of kindness and quiet choices to do what's right. Not a sound followed, no laughter, no whispers, only listening, deep and reverent. I paused, letting the words drift through the space between us, filling the unseen gaps between people who now finally understood. I smiled gently, slowly, and turned to find a familiar face in the crowd. I wish for Skylar, the little girl who once held my hand, to build her own happiness. Strong, quiet, and enduring. There was nothing more to add. Applause followed, not loud, not showy, but steady, sincere. A quiet agreement that no words could match. I bowed my head quietly as I had arrived. No need to bind anyone. No need to prove anything. I turned and walked down the shallow wooden steps, my dusty rose dress brushing lightly against the polished floor. Skylar waited at the bottom. She ran to me, throwing her arms around me, a small frame clinging tightly, as if afraid I'd vanish again. I smoothed her dark brown hair, saying nothing. The hug, the touch, it said everything. Tears glistened in Skylar's eyes, but her smile shone through, radiant beneath the warm golden lights. Eleanor Davis came forward too. She didn't hug me, didn't speak in long phrases. She simply placed a hand on my arm and squeezed gently. "I always believed in you," she whispered, eyes shining behind delicate glasses. Nothing more was needed. Tiffany stood at a distance, her hands hung by her sides. The champagne glass gone. The crowd that once surrounded her gone too. No more admiring eyes. No more eager handshakes. She stood alone, striking but adrift in the light and the lull of the sea breeze. Ethan stood nearby, uncertain, caught again in the space between past and present. He said nothing, did nothing. But Skylar, she held on to me like I was the only solid ground left. And maybe I was. Harrison Sterling stepped forward, his cane tapped gently against the earth. He paused in front of me, bowed slightly. "Martha," just one word, but within it respect, recognition. I nodded, nothing more. We stood there in the soft light, in the hush of the ocean, letting the noise of the party pass by unnoticed. No one could take my worth from me because it had never depended on their eyes. It lived in me. And so as the night came to an end, I knew it was time to leave. Not to disappear, but to begin again on a path of my own. Sometimes we leave not to forget, but to remember how strong we once were. The Amtrak station in Seattle had a quiet, chilled beauty that morning. Long oak benches lined both sides of the hall. Pale sunlight spilled through the mist, settling on the damp cement floor. I pulled a small suitcase behind me, its wheels whispering across the worn tile. My beige trench coat hugged me lightly, just enough for the cool morning air. Far ahead, the red letters on the departure board flickered. The train to Chicago. Skylar stood beside me. Her long hair fell gently over her shoulders, her face soft with a sadness she couldn't quite hide, but she smiled bravely, and her eyes shone more with pride than sorrow. "Grandma," Skylar said, handing me a soft leather notebook, deep brown, "for you to write down the places you visit." I took it, brushing my aging fingers over the cover. The leather was smooth, still smelled of fresh paper. Its corners sharp and unbent. "You always dreamed of traveling across the country." "By train," Skylar whispered. "Now it's time, isn't it?" I smiled. Didn't answer right away. Tiffany stood at a distance across the benches. She watched us. Her expression caught somewhere between hesitation and regret. She didn't step closer, didn't speak. Her hands tightened around her purse straps as if carrying something heavier than any luggage. Ethan stood awkwardly beside her, hands shoved into his coat pockets, eyes avoiding mine. I nodded just once toward Tiffany. No anger, no demand for apology, just a nod enough to say, "I forgive you." The loudspeaker crackled. A soft voice announced boarding for the Chicago line. People stirred. Suitcases rolled. The familiar hollow sound of parting filled the station. I turned to Skylar, wrapped her in one last embrace. She clung tightly, shoulders trembling. I didn't try to comfort her with words. I simply held her. A brief, quiet hug, deep enough to say everything. "Wishing you a journey to find yourself again," she whispered. I let go slowly, took the handle of my suitcase and walked toward the platform, each step deliberate. The morning sun stretched my shadow long across the damp concrete. With every footfall I let go of weight of years of what no longer needed to stay. I didn't look back. Not because I forgot, but because I knew some things are meant to stay behind, tucked safely in memory to make room for what's waiting ahead. On the train I found my seat by the window. A simple seat, brown leather worn at the corners, the scent of wood and metal lingering in the air. I placed my suitcase above, held the leather notebook in my lap. The train began to move. The world outside started to slip past. Low rooftops, dark green trees, the blurred edges of a town I once called mine. Salt wind crept in through a small window crack, the scent of the sea still lingering. I opened the notebook. On the first page, Skylar's careful handwriting, wishing you a journey to find yourself again. I ran my fingers over the words, and in her ink I felt her voice, her eyes, her love. Outside the world widened. Back roads, fields, quiet towns, all waiting. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes, and let the rhythm of the train carry me forward. Sometimes starting over is the greatest reward for those brave enough to leave. The train moved on, carrying with it a woman who once chose silence as her lifelong companion. I used to believe love meant sacrifice, that loving others meant quietly enduring. Until I learned this. If I don't value myself, then even love can be taken for granted. Like an old blanket that once warmed a household through long bitter winters, only to be folded away and forgotten, once no longer needed. If this story touched something within you, take a quiet moment and remember the silent kindnesses still choosing to exist just for you.